1 week. That is all it took. Not a year, not a lifetime. 7 ordinary days, and everything shifted, because change does not begin with noise. It begins with decision. A calm decision. A firm one. Most people wait for motivation. They wait for the right time. They wait for permission. But progress answers only one voice. The voice that says, enough. Enough drifting. Enough delay. Enough excuses dressed up as reasons. What if the smallest habits were shaping the biggest outcomes? What if the life you want is closer than you think? Closer than you have ever been told? This is not theory. This is not hype. This is about simple disciplines, practiced daily, ignored by many, rewarding to the few. Listen closely, because if you apply what follows, your week may look the same, but your direction will never be. Personal responsibility is the moment a human being stops negotiating with reality and starts cooperating with it. It is the instant where blame loses its appeal and ownership becomes the only currency that matters. Most people live as if their lives are happening to them, as if circumstances are the author and they are merely a character reacting to the plot. Personal responsibility reverses that relationship. It places the pen back in your hand. It does not deny hardship, injustice, or randomness. It simply refuses to allow those things to dictate identity, effort, or outcome. When a person accepts personal responsibility, they no longer ask, why did this happen to me? As a complaint, they ask it as a calculation. They stop outsourcing their power to the economy, to their parents, to their past, to their partner, or to their mood. Responsibility is not guilt. It is not self-attack. It is clarity. It is the clear-eyed recognition that regardless of what caused the situation, you are now the one who must respond to it. That realization alone changes behavior, posture, tone, and trajectory. Most frustration in life comes from expecting control without accepting responsibility. People want better results but refuse better habits. They want confidence without discipline, respect without integrity, success without structure. Personal responsibility cuts through that illusion. It says if you want more, you must become more. Not later. Not when conditions improve. Now, this is uncomfortable, which is why it is rare. Comfort thrives in excuses. Growth thrives in ownership. The moment responsibility is accepted, energy shifts. Mental fog clears. Complaining decreases because it no longer serves a function. Victim language fades. Words like they, because, and if only are replaced with I will, I choose, and starting now. This shift is not motivational, it is operational. It changes how time is used, how decisions are made, and how setbacks are interpreted. Failure becomes feedback. Delay becomes data. Resistance becomes a signal, not a stop sign. Personal responsibility also restores dignity. There is quiet pride in knowing that your progress is earned, not granted, that your improvement is not dependent on someone else changing first. This is why responsible individuals move differently. They are calmer under pressure. They do not panic when plans break. They adapt. They adjust. They act. They understand that life is not obligated to be fair, but they are obligated to be effective. This principle forces honesty, brutal honesty. You begin to see patterns you once avoided, patterns in your finances, your relationships, your health, your emotional reactions. Responsibility does not allow denial to survive. If the same problem keeps appearing, responsibility asks what you are repeatedly tolerating, choosing, or avoiding. That question alone can end years of stagnation, not because the answer is pleasant, but because it is actionable. Responsibility also simplifies life. When everything is someone else's fault, the world becomes complex and overwhelming. When results are yours to own, choices become clearer. You stop waiting for permission. You stop waiting for consensus. You stop waiting to feel ready. You understand that readiness is a byproduct of action, not a prerequisite. This is why responsible people move faster, not because they know more, but because they hesitate less. There is a psychological strength that comes with this habit. Anxiety decreases when you stop pretending you have no control. Confidence grows when you keep promises to yourself. Momentum builds when daily actions align with stated goals. Responsibility is the foundation of self-trust. Every time you do what you said you would do, you cast a vote for the identity you want to become. Every time you don't, you weaken that identity. This is not philosophy. It is conditioning. Personal responsibility also changes how you relate to others. You stop demanding that people fix what you refuse to face. You stop resenting others for not meeting expectations you never communicated or enforced. You stop seeking validation and start seeking results. Boundaries strengthen. Standards rise. Relationships either improve or fall away because responsibility exposes misalignment quickly and without apology. Many people fear responsibility because they associate it with pressure. In truth, irresponsibility carries far more pressure. The pressure of uncertainty, the pressure of dependence, the pressure of unresolved potential. Responsibility replaces that pressure with purpose, with direction, with a sense of forward motion. Even when progress is slow, it is yours. Even when the road is hard, you are walking it deliberately. This habit does not require dramatic gestures. It begins in private moments. Choosing not to lie to yourself, choosing not to scroll when you should focus, choosing not to speak excuses out loud, choosing to prepare when it would be easier to hope. These small decisions compound quickly because they reshape identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who reacts and start seeing yourself as someone who initiates. Responsibility also reframes time. You stop seeing the past as a prison and the future as a lottery. The past becomes a lesson. The future becomes a project. Today becomes the only leverage point that matters. This removes the illusion that one big event will save you. Instead, you understand that your life is the sum of repeated, often boring choices made when no one is watching. When responsibility is fully integrated, motivation becomes less necessary. You do not act because you feel inspired. You act because you decided. Feelings become secondary. Commitment becomes primary. This is why disciplined people appear motivated even when they are tired. They are not driven by emotion. They are driven by agreement with themselves. The world responds differently to responsible individuals. Opportunities appear because trust is visible. Respect grows because consistency is evident. People listen because words are backed by action. This is not manipulation, it is credibility. Responsibility makes you reliable, and reliability is rare. Rare things are valued. At its highest level, personal responsibility becomes a moral stance. It is the refusal to waste potential, the refusal to blame circumstances for choices, the refusal to live below your capacity while claiming awareness. It is quiet. It does not announce itself. It shows up in results. This habit alone can alter the direction of a life in days not because circumstances magically change, but because perception does. When perception changes, behavior follows. When behavior follows, outcomes eventually obey. Responsibility is the lever that moves all other habits into alignment, because without it, discipline collapses, goals dissolve, and intention remains abstract. The individual who fully accepts responsibility understands something most never grasp, that freedom and responsibility are not opposites. They are the same force expressed at different levels. The more responsibility you carry, the more freedom you earn. Freedom from excuses, freedom from regret, freedom from the exhausting cycle of hoping things will somehow work out without your full engagement. Responsibility demands that you stand where you are, assess honestly, and move deliberately, knowing that every choice reinforces a direction, every delay reinforces a habit, and every moment of ownership sharpens the person you are becoming as you realize that nothing in your life is neutral. Everything is either strengthening you or weakening you, and the decision of which one it becomes is being made constantly, whether you acknowledge it or not, because responsibility does not wait for confidence. It creates it through action taken in alignment with truth, even when the truth is uncomfortable, even when the effort is unseen, even when progress feels slow, because the moment you stop asking who is to blame and start asking what is required of you now, the entire structure of your life begins to reorganize around that question. And once that happens, there is no going back to pretending that someone else is coming to do the work for you. Discipline mornings are not about waking up early for the sake of discipline itself, nor are they about rigid routines designed to impress others. They are about controlling the first inputs of the day before the world has a chance to impose its chaos. The morning is the only part of the day that has not yet been contaminated by demands, interruptions, opinions, and emotional residue. How that window is used determines not only productivity, but identity. A disciplined morning is a declaration that you are in charge of your direction before circumstances attempt to steer you elsewhere. Most people underestimate how vulnerable the mind is in the early hours. Upon waking, the brain is highly suggestible. Whatever it consumes first becomes the lens through which the rest of the day is interpreted. If the first interaction is stress, urgency, or distraction, the nervous system calibrates itself to react rather than to lead. Disciplined mornings prevent that hijacking. They establish order before disorder appears. They anchor intention before reaction becomes habitual. The power of a disciplined morning lies in its cumulative effect. One structured morning may feel insignificant. 10 begin to feel stabilizing. 30 reshape self-perception. Over time, you no longer see yourself as someone trying to get organized. You see yourself as someone who already is. This identity shift is critical because behavior follows identity more reliably than it follows motivation. When discipline becomes part of who you believe you are, consistency requires less effort. A disciplined morning reduces decision fatigue. By standardizing key actions early in the day, mental energy is preserved for higher level thinking later. When you do not have to negotiate with yourself about when to wake up, whether to move your body, or how to begin your work, you eliminate hundreds of micro decisions that drain focus. This is not about being robotic. It is about being strategic with limited cognitive resources emotionally. Disciplined mornings create stability. They provide a sense of groundedness before the unpredictable nature of the day unfolds. When challenges arise, they are met from a position of preparation rather than panic. This is why people with strong morning routines appear calmer under pressure. They have already won a series of small battles before encountering the larger ones. Confidence is not generated by success alone. It is generated by keeping promises to yourself, especially when no one is watching. There is also a moral component to disciplined mornings. Waking with intention is a form of self-respect. It signals that your goals, health, and growth are worthy of protected time. Without this boundary, life defaults to consumption. Emails consume attention. Social media consumes focus. Other people's priorities consume energy. Discipline in the morning is the refusal to allow that consumption to define the tone of your life. Physiologically, disciplined mornings regulate the body. Consistent wake times stabilize circadian rhythms. Movement early in the day improves blood flow and mental clarity. Exposure to light sharpens alertness. Hydration and nutrition support cognitive performance. These are not wellness trends. They are biological realities. When the body is regulated, the mind follows. When the mind is clear, discipline becomes easier to sustain. Many people resist disciplined mornings because they associate them with deprivation. They imagine loss of comfort, loss of spontaneity, loss of sleep. In reality, the opposite is true. Discipline does not remove freedom. It postpones gratification in service of greater control. The freedom gained from disciplined mornings is the freedom of choice later in the day, the freedom to respond thoughtfully rather than react emotionally, the freedom to end the day without regret. Disciplined mornings also train delayed gratification. Getting out of bed when it would be easier to stay comfortable strengthens the same psychological muscle required to resist distractions, complete difficult tasks, and persist through discomfort. This makes mornings a training ground for character. Each morning becomes a rehearsal for the type of decisions you will make under pressure. Over time, the habit generalizes. Discipline in the morning becomes discipline in conversation, in work, and in personal standards. There is a compounding advantage to starting the day with progress. Even minimal progress creates momentum. Momentum changes perception of effort. Tasks that felt heavy feel lighter once movement has begun. This is why disciplined mornings often lead to unusually productive days, even when the routine itself is simple. The value is not in the complexity of the actions, but in the signal they send to the brain that forward motion is the default state. Disciplined mornings also create separation between intention and impulse. Without structure, mornings are driven by whatever stimulus is loudest. Notifications, messages, worries, and cravings dictate behavior. Discipline introduces a pause. In that pause, intention has room to assert itself. This is where long-term goals regain relevance. This is where values re-enter awareness before being buried under urgency. Over time, mornings become a private standard. You begin to know whether you showed up for yourself before anyone else had the chance to judge you. This private accountability is more powerful than external pressure. It builds integrity. Integrity simplifies decision-making because it reduces internal conflict. When actions align with values early in the day, fewer compromises are made later. Disciplined mornings also redefine productivity. Instead of measuring success by volume of tasks completed, Success is measured by alignment. Did the day begin in service of the person you are becoming or the habits you are trying to escape? This reframing reduces burnout because effort feels purposeful rather than scattered. Energy is invested rather than spent. Importantly, disciplined mornings are adaptable. They are not rigid schedules that collapse when life intervenes. They are principles applied consistently within changing circumstances. The discipline is not the exact sequence of actions, but the commitment to intentionality. Even when travel, illness, or disruption occurs, the underlying standard remains intact. This flexibility prevents all or nothing thinking, which is one of the primary causes of habit failure. The psychological payoff of disciplined mornings is trust. You begin to trust yourself to act in alignment with your goals, regardless of mood. That trust becomes self-efficacy. Self-efficacy fuels ambition because goals feel attainable when you believe in your ability to execute. Without this belief, even the most inspiring vision remains theoretical. Disciplined mornings also alter time perception. Days feel longer, not because there are more hours, but because attention is sharper. Presence increases. When the day begins deliberately, moments are not lost to distraction. This creates the sensation of having more time, which reduces stress and improves decision quality. Scarcity thinking fades when the day feels under control. This habit is particularly transformative because it operates before resistance fully forms. Later in the day, discipline must compete with fatigue, stress, and accumulated decisions. In the morning, discipline faces fewer obstacles. This makes it the most leveraged point of intervention for behavior change. Small victories here yield disproportionate returns. Ultimately, disciplined mornings are about leadership. Not leadership over others, but leadership over self. They are a daily reminder that your future is shaped by how you begin, not how you intend. The morning sets the tempo. It establishes the standard. It quietly answers the question of whether growth is optional or expected. And when that question is answered consistently, the rest of life begins to align around that expectation as the day unfolds from a position of control rather than reaction, and the discipline practiced in those early hours continues to echo through every choice that follows. Intentional goal setting is the act of deciding a direction before momentum decides it for you. It is the difference between drifting through activity and deliberately shaping outcomes. Most people have wishes, preferences, and vague hopes, but very few have intentions that are defined, measured, and owned. Intentional goals force clarity where ambiguity once lived. They demand that you articulate not just what you want, but why it matters, what it will cost, and what you are willing to change in order to achieve it. Without intentional goals, effort becomes scattered. Energy leaks into tasks that feel productive but lead nowhere. Business replaces progress. Intentional goal setting arrests that pattern by narrowing focus. It eliminates the illusion that everything matters equally. When a goal is chosen intentionally, it becomes a filter. Opportunities are evaluated through it. Distractions are exposed by it. Decisions become faster because alignment is obvious. This alone reduces mental friction and increases execution quality. Intentional goals operate on identity before they operate on outcomes. The moment you set a goal with intention, you are making a statement about the type of person you are choosing to become. A goal is not just a target, it is a vote for a future identity. When goals are vague, identity remains vague. When goals are precise, identity sharpens. You begin to see yourself not as someone who is trying, but as someone who is committed to a specific trajectory. Many people avoid intentional goal setting because it removes plausible deniability. If the goal is unclear, failure can always be explained away. If the goal is precise, accountability becomes unavoidable. This discomfort is exactly why intentional goals are transformative. They replace comforting ambiguity with constructive pressure. Pressure, when self-imposed and meaningful, does not crush. It clarifies. It forces prioritization. It reveals what you truly value through what you are willing to sacrifice. Intentional goal setting also anchors time. Instead of reacting to what feels urgent, you allocate time based on what is important. This reverses one of the most common failures in adult life, which is allowing short-term demands to cannibalize long-term direction. An intentional goal pulls the future into the present. It makes tomorrow relevant to today. This relevance is what sustains effort when motivation fluctuates. There is a psychological distinction between goals that are adopted and goals that are chosen. Adopted goals come from comparison, expectation, or social pressure. Chosen goals come from reflection and alignment. Intentional goal setting requires that distinction. It asks whether the goal reflects your values or someone else's approval. Goals that are not intentional rarely survive resistance because there is no internal anchor when difficulty appears. Intentional goals endure because they are rooted in meaning, not image. Intentional goals also demand specificity, not because precision guarantees success, but because it enables feedback. A vague goal cannot tell you whether you are winning or losing. A precise goal creates a measurable relationship between effort and outcome. This feedback loop is essential for growth. It allows for adjustment without discouragement. Progress becomes visible. Momentum becomes trackable. Confidence grows as evidence accumulates. Another overlooked aspect of intentional goal setting is constraint. Intentional goals do not expand your options, they limit them. This limitation is a strength. By saying yes to one direction, you say no to countless others. This pruning is necessary for excellence. Without it, attention fragments and mastery becomes impossible. Constraint simplifies life by reducing the number of decisions you need to make each day. Intentional goals also expose misalignment quickly. When daily behavior contradicts stated goals, the tension becomes obvious. This discomfort is useful. It highlights where discipline, systems, or beliefs need to change. Without intentional goals, misalignment persists unnoticed. With them, course correction becomes possible before years are lost to quiet drift. There is also an emotional stability that comes from intentional goal setting. When goals are clear, setbacks feel contextual rather than catastrophic. A single bad day does not threaten identity because the direction remains intact. This reduces emotional volatility. You stop overreacting to short-term fluctuations because you are anchored to a longer-term aim. This perspective is a form of psychological resilience. Intentional goal setting also redefines success. Instead of success being an external outcome dependent on variables you cannot fully control, success becomes adherence to process and direction. You measure success by whether your actions align with your stated goals. This shift restores agency. Even on difficult days, you can succeed by acting in alignment. This reduces helplessness and increases persistence. Importantly, intentional goals must be revisited. They are not set once and forgotten. Reflection is part of intention. As information changes, goals may need refinement. This is not inconsistency. It is responsiveness. Intentional goal setting is dynamic, not rigid. The intention is the direction, not the exact path. This flexibility prevents stagnation while preserving focus. Intentional goals also elevate standards. When you know exactly what you are aiming for, mediocrity becomes harder to justify. You begin to notice behaviors that fall short. This awareness is not self-criticism. It is self-leadership. Standards rise naturally when purpose is clear. You demand more from yourself, not out of punishment, but out of respect for the goal. There is a cumulative confidence that emerges from intentional goal setting. Each aligned action reinforces self-belief. Each small win compounds into trust. Over time, you stop doubting your ability to follow through because you have evidence. This confidence is quiet and durable. It is not dependent on praise. It is built on proof. Intentional goals also shape environment. Once a goal is clear, you begin to adjust surroundings to support it. Habits, schedules, relationships, and information inputs change. This environmental alignment reduces reliance on willpower. Progress becomes easier because friction is removed in advance. This is strategic discipline rather than constant self-control. Ultimately, intentional goal setting is an act of self-respect. It says that your future deserves planning, that your effort deserves direction, and that your time deserves purpose. It is the refusal to let potential remain theoretical. When goals are set intentionally, action gains meaning, sacrifice gains justification, and consistency gains momentum because you are no longer moving randomly. You are moving deliberately towards something you have chosen with clarity, ownership, and resolve. Daily reading is one of the most underestimated disciplines in personal development because its effects are subtle in the short term and profound in the long term. It does not announce itself with immediate transformation or dramatic emotional spikes. Instead, it works quietly, reshaping perception, expanding context, and refining judgment over time. Reading daily is not about accumulating facts. It is about conditioning the mind to think differently, more accurately, and more independently. Every human being operates from a mental framework built from accumulated inputs. Conversations, experiences, media, and environment all contribute to that framework. The problem is that most of these inputs are unfiltered and reactive. Daily reading introduces intentional input. It allows you to choose the ideas, principles, and perspectives that shape your thinking rather than absorbing whatever happens to be loudest or most emotionally charged. This choice alone shifts you from passive consumption to active development. Daily reading stretches time. You gain access to decades of experience, insight, and reflection condensed into hours. You learn from people you will never meet, mistakes you will never have to make, and situations you may never personally encounter. This creates an intellectual leverage that is impossible to replicate through experience alone. Experience teaches slowly and often painfully. Reading teaches efficiently and preemptively. There is also a psychological stabilizing effect to daily reading. When you read consistently, your mind becomes less reactive to immediate circumstances. You begin to think in principles rather than impulses. Problems are contextualized rather than dramatized. Challenges are framed as solvable rather than personal. This happens because reading exposes you to patterns. You begin to recognize that most struggles are not unique. They are variations of recurring human themes. That recognition reduces anxiety and increases composure. Daily reading also sharpens language, and language shapes thought. The more precise your vocabulary, the more precise your thinking becomes. When thoughts are vague, decisions are weak. Reading improves articulation internally before it improves communication externally. You gain the ability to name experiences accurately, which gives you control over them. Confusion often comes from an inability to define what is happening. Reading reduces that confusion by expanding conceptual clarity. Another critical benefit of daily reading is improved decision making. Better decisions come from better mental models. Books expose you to frameworks for understanding risk, incentives, behavior, and consequence. Over time, these frameworks become intuitive. You stop relying solely on instinct and start integrating structured thinking. This does not make you slower. It makes you more accurate. Accuracy compounds. Daily reading also builds intellectual humility. The more you read, the more you realize how much you do not know. This awareness prevents arrogance and rigidity. It keeps the mind flexible and open to revision. In a rapidly changing world, flexibility is an advantage. Those who stop reading often stop learning, and those who stop learning eventually become irrelevant. Regardless of past success, there is a compounding confidence that comes from daily reading. Not the loud confidence of opinion, but the quiet confidence of understanding. You are less easily swayed by trends, panic, or popular narratives because you have context. You recognize recycled ideas and exaggerated claims. This discernment protects you from manipulation and impulsive decisions. Confidence rooted in comprehension is durable. Daily reading also improves focus. In an environment designed to fragment attention, reading trains sustained concentration. It requires you to follow an argument, track a narrative, and hold multiple ideas simultaneously. This cognitive endurance transfers to other areas of life. Work becomes more efficient. Conversations become deeper. Problem solving becomes more systematic. Focus, once trained, does not remain isolated. Many people claim they do not have time to read, but time scarcity is rarely the issue. Priority clarity is. Reading does not require hours. Consistency matters more than volume. 15 focused minutes daily outperforms sporadic long sessions because it reinforces identity. You begin to see yourself as a reader, a learner, someone who invests in their mind daily. Identity drives behavior more reliably than intention. Daily reading also counteracts intellectual stagnation. Without new input, the mind begins to recycle old conclusions. Opinions harden, curiosity fades. Reading reintroduces curiosity. It invites questions. It challenges assumptions. It disrupts complacency. This mental friction is healthy. Growth requires exposure to ideas that are slightly uncomfortable or unfamiliar. There is also an emotional maturity that develops through reading. Exposure to different perspectives increases empathy. You begin to understand motivations behind behavior rather than reacting to surface actions. This does not mean you excuse poor behavior. It means you interpret it accurately. Accurate interpretation leads to better responses. Emotional intelligence improves when perspective expands. Daily reading strengthens long-term thinking. Many books operate on timescales longer than immediate gratification. They emphasize patience, compounding, and delayed results. This influences how you evaluate your own progress. You become less impatient with slow growth and more committed to sustainable improvement. Short-term frustration loses power when viewed through a long-term lens. Reading also reinforces solitude. It teaches you to be alone with your thoughts without discomfort. This is increasingly rare and increasingly valuable. The ability to sit quietly and engage deeply with an idea builds inner stability. That stability reduces dependence on constant stimulation and external validation. Importantly, daily reading is a private discipline. There is no applause, no immediate recognition. This makes it a pure investment. It is done for internal development, not external approval. Habits built in privacy often produce the strongest character changes because they are not performative. Over time, daily reading reshapes ambition. You begin to want better questions, not just better answers. You become less interested in shortcuts and more interested in mastery. You recognize that success without understanding is fragile. Understanding creates resilience. Daily reading also integrates seamlessly with other disciplines. It enhances goal setting by providing clarity. It supports discipline by strengthening self-control. It deepens responsibility by expanding awareness of cause and effect. It is a foundational habit that improves the quality of every other habit because it improves the quality of thought behind them. Ultimately, daily reading is an act of self-leadership. It is the decision to invest in the one asset that influences every outcome, your mind. While circumstances change and skills evolve, the ability to think clearly, learn continuously, and interpret reality accurately remains the most reliable advantage a person can develop. And when reading becomes a daily practice rather than an occasional activity, that advantage compounds quietly, steadily, and relentlessly, shaping judgment, behavior, and direction in ways that are not immediately visible, but eventually undeniable. Focused association is the deliberate choice of who and what you allow to influence your thinking standards and behavior on a daily basis. It is the recognition that human beings are permeable systems, constantly shaped by their environment, often without awareness or consent. Whether you acknowledge it or not, the people you spend time with, the conversations you tolerate, and the ideas you repeatedly expose yourself to are actively programming your expectations of what is normal, possible, and acceptable. Most people assume they are independent thinkers. In reality, thinking is heavily contextual. Beliefs are reinforced socially. Habits are normalized collectively. Standards rise or fall depending on proximity. Focused association is not about elitism or rejection. It is about accuracy. It is about understanding that proximity creates persuasion, and persuasion shapes outcomes. When you associate closely with individuals who complain, drift, and rationalize mediocrity, those behaviors begin to feel reasonable. When you associate with individuals who value discipline, growth, and accountability, those behaviors begin to feel inevitable. Focused association operates below conscious intention. You do not need to be told to lower your standards. You simply adjust them to fit the room. This is why environment change often produces faster results than willpower. Willpower fights influence. Focused association replaces it. Instead of constantly resisting negative inputs, you curate better ones. This is not weakness. It is strategic intelligence. The most dangerous associations are not overtly destructive. They are subtly misaligned. People who are kind but complacent. intelligent but undisciplined, ambitious in language but passive in action. These associations rarely feel harmful in the moment, yet they quietly erode urgency. They normalize delay. They make excuses sound thoughtful. Over time, they reduce internal pressure act, and that reduction costs years. Focused association also includes ideas, not just people. Books, podcasts, conversations, and media all qualify. If your mental diet is filled with outrage, gossip, and distraction, your emotional state will mirror those inputs. You will feel busy but unfocused, informed but unclear, stimulated but stagnant. When you intentionally associate with ideas that emphasize responsibility, long-term thinking, and personal agency, your internal dialogue changes. You begin to speak to yourself differently. That self-talk drives behavior more powerfully than external advice. There is a psychological comfort in staying associated with familiar environments. Even when they limit growth, familiarity feels safe. Growth feels uncertain. Focused association requires the courage to tolerate temporary discomfort for long-term alignment. It may mean spending less time in rooms where you are understood and more time in rooms where you are challenged. This challenge is not antagonistic. It is elevating. It reveals gaps. It sharpens awareness. It forces adaptation. Focused association does not require abandoning everyone who is not aligned with your goals. It requires clarity about influence. Not all relationships are meant to be developmental. Some are emotional. Some are historical. Some are situational. The mistake is allowing non-developmental relationships to dominate developmental time. Focused association is about weighting influence appropriately. Who gets your best hours? Who shapes your thinking when decisions are made? When association is focused, progress accelerates because resistance decreases. You no longer need to explain why discipline matters. You no longer need to defend ambition. You no longer need to justify growth. The environment reinforces the direction. This reinforcement conserves energy. Energy conserved becomes momentum. Focused association also improves self-image. You begin to see yourself through the standards of the people you respect. If you are surrounded by individuals who expect excellence, you rise to meet it. If you are surrounded by individuals who tolerate inconsistency, you excuse it. This is not about pressure. It is about expectation. Expectation quietly shapes behavior. There is also accountability embedded in focused association. When you associate with people who act on their goals, inaction becomes visible. Silence becomes uncomfortable. This discomfort is productive. It is not shaming. It is clarifying. It reminds you of your own stated intentions. In contrast, unfocused association allows stagnation to hide. Everyone is busy. No one is progressing. Nothing feels wrong until years pass. Focused association changes language. Conversations shift from complaints to solutions, from distractions to strategies, from stories about the past to plans for the future. Language shapes cognition. When your environment speaks in terms of possibility and responsibility, your mind follows. This linguistic shift is subtle but powerful. Importantly, focused association is proactive. Waiting for the right people to appear is passive. Seeking environments that challenge and elevate you is deliberate. This may involve mentorship, communities of practice, professional circles, or even solitary association through reading and study when physical proximity is limited. The form matters less than the quality of influence. Focused association also strengthens boundaries. You become more selective with time, not out of arrogance, but out of respect for your goals. You begin to recognize that every yes is a trade-off. Saying yes to draining interactions often means saying no to preparation, reflection, or execution. This clarity simplifies decisions and reduces resentment. There is a compounding effect to this habit. As standards rise, associations refine. As associations refine, standards rise further. This feedback loop creates upward momentum. Progress becomes self-reinforcing. Over time, you look back and realize that many of your breakthroughs were not the result of sudden insight, but of sustained exposure to better influences. Focused association also protects against regression. When challenges arise, the environment reminds you of who you are becoming. It stabilizes identity during uncertainty. This support is not emotional dependency. It is contextual reinforcement. It keeps direction intact when motivation fluctuates. Ultimately, focused association is an acknowledgement of human reality. You are influenced. You always have been. The only question is whether that influence is accidental or intentional. When association is left to chance, outcomes are inconsistent. When association is focused, growth becomes predictable because you are no longer swimming against the current of your environment. You are moving with it, supported by people, ideas, and standards that continuously pull you toward the version of yourself you are committed to becoming. Time stewardship is the conscious management of your most finite resource with intention, respect, and strategic awareness. It is not about squeezing more activity into the day, but about aligning how time is spent with what actually matters. Every person receives the same 24 hours, yet outcomes vary dramatically because time is not merely used. It is either invested, wasted, or traded unconsciously. Stewardship implies responsibility. It assumes that time is entrusted to you and that how you manage it reflects your values, priorities, and self-discipline. Most people do not actively manage their time. They react to it. They respond to urgency instead of importance. They allow notifications, demands, and habits to fragment their attention. This reactive posture creates the illusion of business while producing very little progress. Time stewardship interrupts that pattern. It requires stepping back and deciding in advance what deserves focus and what does not. This decision is where leverage begins. Time stewardship starts with awareness. You cannot manage what you refuse to measure. When you begin to observe how your time is actually spent rather than how you believe it is spent, gaps appear. Hours disappear into low-value activities. Energy is spent on maintenance instead of advancement. Awareness removes denial. It replaces stories with data. This clarity is often uncomfortable, but it is essential. Without it, improvement remains theoretical. Stewardship also demands prioritization. Not everything is equally important, even if everything feels urgent. Time stewards differentiate between tasks that maintain life and tasks that expand it. Maintenance keeps you functioning. Expansion moves you forward. Without deliberate allocation, maintenance will always consume expansion because it shouts louder. Time stewardship ensures that growth activities receive protected space before exhaustion sets in. Another core element of time stewardship is intentional constraint. Saying yes to everything is not generosity. It is dilution. Every commitment carries an opportunity cost. When you commit time to one activity, you are simultaneously choosing not to commit it elsewhere. Time stewards understand this trade, often make it consciously. They do not overcommit and then complain about overwhelm. They commit selectively and execute fully. Time stewardship also involves sequencing. Energy fluctuates throughout the day. High-value work requires high-quality attention. When critical thinking is postponed until mental fatigue sets in, outcomes suffer. Stewards align demanding tasks with peak energy and reserve low cognitive tasks for low energy periods. This alignment increases effectiveness without extending hours. It is a force multiplier rather than a grind. Emotionally, time stewardship reduces stress. Much anxiety comes from the sense that time is slipping away without control. When time is planned and protected, that anxiety diminishes. You may still have more to do than hours available, but you are no longer guessing. You know what matters, what can wait, and what can be eliminated. Certainty replaces chaos. Time stewardship also strengthens integrity. When you schedule time for what you claim to value and honor that schedule, you reinforce self-trust. When you consistently violate your own plans, self-trust erodes. This erosion shows up as procrastination, hesitation, and self-doubt. Stewardship rebuilds that trust by aligning intention with action. Each followed plan is a small vote for reliability. There is also a strategic dimension to time stewardship. Not all hours are equal in their return. Some hours produce compounding results. Learning, planning, relationship building, and system creation often yield delayed but exponential returns. Entertainment and distraction provide immediate gratification, but little residual value. Time stewards bias their schedules toward activities with long-term payoff. This bias explains why progress accelerates over time for disciplined individuals. Time stewardship also requires the courage to disappoint. You cannot protect your time without occasionally saying no to people, requests, and opportunities. This discomfort is temporary. The cost of constant accommodation is permanent stagnation. Stewards accept short-term discomfort in exchange for long-term alignment. They understand that resentment often comes not from doing too much, but from doing what does not matter to them. Digital boundaries are a modern necessity of time stewardship. Unchecked technology fragments attention into unusable fragments. Even brief interruptions impose cognitive switching costs that degrade performance. Stewards create friction around distractions and ease around focus. They design their environment to support concentration rather than test willpower repeatedly. This design thinking is more effective than relying on discipline alone. Time stewardship also reframes productivity. Productivity is not about speed. It is about direction. Moving quickly in the wrong direction wastes time more efficiently. Stewards regularly review whether their activities align with their goals. They correct early rather than doubling down out of habit. This reflective loop prevents years of misdirected effort. There is a humility embedded in time stewardship. It acknowledges that you cannot do everything. This acceptance is freeing. It allows you to focus deeply rather than broadly. Depth produces mastery. Mastery produces leverage. Leverage produces freedom. Attempting to do everything produces the opposite: shallow effort, mediocre results, and constant fatigue. Time stewardship also improves decision quality. When time is scarce and unmanaged, decisions are rushed. Rushed decisions are reactive. When time is allocated intentionally, decisions are made from a place of calm and foresight. This improves outcomes and reduces regret. Fewer decisions need to be reversed when they are made deliberately. Over time, stewardship reshapes identity. You stop seeing yourself as busy and start seeing yourself as intentional. This identity shift affects how others treat you. Boundaries are respected because they are consistently enforced. Reliability increases because commitments are realistic. Trust grows because words and calendars align. Time stewardship also enhances presence. When you are not mentally juggling unfinished tasks, you can fully engage with the moment at hand. Conversations improve. Work deepens. Rest becomes restorative rather than guilty. Presence is a byproduct of clarity. Clarity comes from stewardship. Ultimately, time stewardship is not about controlling every minute. It is about honoring the finite nature of life. Each day spent unconsciously is a day that cannot be recovered. Stewardship is the decision to treat time as the asset it is, to allocate it according to values rather than impulses, and to recognize that how you spend your hours is how you build your life, because days become weeks, weeks become years, and years become outcomes. And the discipline of stewarding time is the discipline of shaping destiny through consistent, intentional choice. Emotional control is the ability to experience emotion without being ruled by it. It is not suppression, denial, or emotional coldness. It is regulation. It is the capacity to pause between stimulus and response and choose behavior deliberately rather than reflexively. Most outcomes in life are not determined by intelligence, talent, or opportunity, but by how consistently a person can act in alignment with long-term goals despite short-term emotional fluctuations. Human beings are emotional creatures first and rational creatures second. Emotion evolved to ensure survival, not success. Fear, anger, pleasure, and avoidance were designed to protect the body in immediate situations, not to optimize decisions over months or years. Emotional control acknowledges this mismatch. It recognizes that while emotions provide information, they are poor decision makers when left unchecked. Control does not mean ignoring emotion. It means interpreting it accurately and deciding whether it deserves authority. Most regret is emotional in origin, words spoken in anger, opportunities avoided out of fear, commitments abandoned because motivation faded. Emotional control reduces regret by slowing reaction time. It inserts awareness into moments where impulse would normally dominate. That awareness creates choice. Choice creates consistency. Consistency creates results. Emotional control begins with recognition. You cannot manage what you do not notice. Many people believe emotions simply happen to them, uncontrollable and absolute. In reality, emotions follow patterns. They are triggered by specific thoughts, environments, and interpretations. Once these patterns are observed, they lose some of their power. Awareness creates distance. Distance creates leverage. This control is especially critical under pressure. Stress narrows perception. It exaggerates threats and minimizes options. Without emotional control, stress leads to tunnel vision and poor judgment. With control, stress becomes a signal rather than a command. You still feel it, but you do not obey it blindly. This distinction separates leaders from reactors. Emotional control also preserves energy. Emotional reactivity is exhausting. Constant frustration, resentment, and anxiety drain cognitive and physical resources. When emotions are regulated, energy is conserved for execution rather than recovery. This efficiency compounds. Calm individuals are not less driven, they are less distracted. Another overlooked aspect of emotional control is patience. Many goals fail not because they are unrealistic, but because impatience interrupts the process. Progress is rarely linear. Plateaus are inevitable. Without emotional control, plateaus feel like failure. With control, they are interpreted as part of the process. This interpretation determines whether effort continues or stops. Emotional control also strengthens communication. Uncontrolled emotion distorts language. It sharpens tone, narrows listening, and escalates conflict. When emotions are regulated, communication becomes precise. You say what needs to be said without unnecessary damage. This builds trust and credibility. People listen more closely to those who are not hijacked by their own reactions. Control does not mean lack of passion. In fact, it enables sustained passion. When passion is unregulated, it burns hot and fades quickly. When regulated, it becomes steady and durable. Emotional control allows intensity without volatility. This balance is rare and powerful. There is also a moral dimension to emotional control. When you allow emotions to dictate behavior, you transfer responsibility outward. You blame anger, stress, or fear for choices you made. Control restores responsibility. It acknowledges emotion without surrendering agency. This is a form of integrity. You are accountable not for what you feel, but for what you do with it. Emotional control improves resilience. Setbacks are inevitable. Criticism will occur. Loss will happen. Without control, these experiences derail progress. With control, they inform adjustment. Pain is processed rather than projected. Learning replaces rumination. Forward motion resumes more quickly. Importantly, emotional control is trainable. It is not a personality trait reserved for a few. It is a skill developed through repetition. Pausing before responding. Naming emotions accurately. Questioning interpretations. Choosing behavior aligned with values rather than feelings. These small practices accumulate into strong regulation over time. Emotional control also protects relationships. Many relationships fail not because of lack of care, but because of unmanaged reactions. Control creates space for empathy. You can disagree without demeaning. You can set boundaries without hostility. This stability makes relationships safer and more durable. There is a strategic advantage to emotional control in professional environments. Negotiation, leadership, and decision-making all benefit from composure. Those who remain calm under pressure command respect. They are trusted with responsibility because they are predictable in their behavior, even when circumstances are unpredictable. Control also sharpens focus. Emotional noise competes with attention. Worry, frustration, and anticipation pull the mind away from the present task. When emotions are regulated, attention stabilizes, work quality improves, errors decrease, time is used more effectively. Perhaps the most transformative aspect of emotional control is freedom. Freedom from being dragged by moods. Freedom from repeating the same arguments internally and externally. Freedom from self-sabotage disguised as authenticity. This freedom is not numbness. It is clarity. Emotional control does not eliminate pain, but it prevents pain from becoming chaos. It allows grief without collapse, anger without destruction, excitement without recklessness. It creates a stable internal environment from which consistent action is possible. Over time, emotional control reshapes identity. You stop seeing yourself as volatile or reactive and start seeing yourself as steady and reliable. This identity shift reinforces the habit. You expect composure from yourself, and expectation influences behavior. Ultimately, emotional control is the discipline that protects all other disciplines. Without it, habits collapse under stress, goals dissolve under doubt, and intentions disappear under impulse. With it, effort continues even when emotion resists, direction holds even when motivation fades, and character remains intact even when circumstances provoke, because mastery over emotion is mastery over response, and mastery over response is the foundation of deliberate living in a world that constantly invites reaction. Consistent action is the bridge between intention and outcome. It is the daily execution of small, often unremarkable behaviors that accumulate into significant results over time. Most people understand what they should do. Very few do it consistently. This gap between knowledge and action is where potential stalls. Consistent action closes that gap not through intensity, but through reliability. Human psychology is biased toward novelty and immediate reward. Starting feels exciting. Planning feels productive. Finishing feels satisfying. Repeating feels boring. Consistent action requires moving past this bias. It asks you to value progress over excitement and direction over drama. The ability to show up again, especially when enthusiasm fades, is what separates those who make progress from those who collect intentions. Consistency is often misunderstood as rigidity. In reality, it is adaptability applied repeatedly. Consistent action does not require perfect conditions. It requires a minimum standard that is met regardless of circumstances. This standard protects momentum. When effort drops to zero during difficulty, restarting becomes costly. When effort is reduced but maintained, continuity remains intact. The power of consistent action lies in compounding. Small actions performed daily create nonlinear returns. The first few repetitions appear insignificant. Progress feels invisible. This is where most people quit. They misinterpret the lack of immediate feedback as failure. In reality, they are in the accumulation phase where effort is being stored rather than displayed. Those who understand this continue. Those who do not stop prematurely. Consistent action reshapes identity. Each repeated behavior reinforces a self-image. When you act consistently, you begin to see yourself as someone who follows through. This identity shift reduces internal resistance. Behavior aligned with identity feels natural. Inconsistency creates internal conflict. Consistency creates coherence. Another benefit of consistent action is reduced decision-making. When action is habitual, it no longer requires negotiation. You do not ask whether to act, you ask how to act. This removes friction. The energy saved is redirected toward quality and improvement rather than initiation. Consistent action also builds tolerance for discomfort. Repetition exposes you to boredom, frustration, and doubt. By continuing anyway, you train resilience. Discomfort loses its authority. You learn that unpleasant feelings do not require avoidance. This lesson generalizes to other areas of life. Strengthening overall discipline, there is a stabilizing emotional effect to consistent action. Progress, even slow progress, creates a sense of control. Control reduces anxiety. Anxiety often stems from unpredictability. Consistency introduces predictability. You may not control outcomes, but you control effort. That control is psychologically grounding. Consistent action also creates feedback loops. Repetition generates data. You see what works and what does not. Adjustment becomes possible. Without consistency, feedback is noisy and unreliable. You cannot improve what you do not repeat. Mastery requires repetition under varying conditions. Many people rely on motivation to act. Motivation is volatile. It fluctuates with mood, energy, and circumstance. Consistent action is not dependent on motivation. It is driven by commitment. Commitment persists even when motivation disappears. This distinction is critical. Those who wait to feel ready remain stuck. Those who act consistently become ready through action. Consistent action also reframes failure. Missed days are not proof of incapacity, they are data points. The goal is not perfection, but continuity. Returning quickly after disruption preserves identity. The danger is not missing once, but stopping entirely. Consistency allows recovery without self-judgment. There is also a strategic patience embedded in consistent action. You stop seeking shortcuts. You understand that meaningful results require time. This patience protects you from impulsive decisions that undermine long-term goals. You are less tempted by quick fixes because you trust the process you are following. Consistent action improves confidence. Confidence is often mistaken for belief in success. In reality, it is belief in your ability to execute. Each completed action strengthens that belief. Over time, you trust yourself to do what is required. This trust is more valuable than optimism because it is evidence-based. Consistent action also simplifies planning. When action is reliable, planning becomes realistic. You can forecast progress accurately. This accuracy reduces stress and increases effectiveness. Unrealistic plans often stem from inconsistent execution. Another important aspect is that consistent action lowers the emotional cost of effort. When action is sporadic, each attempt feels heavy. When action is routine, effort feels lighter. The same task requires less psychological energy because it is familiar. Familiarity reduces resistance. Consistent action also protects against overthinking. Thinking without action creates anxiety. Action resolves uncertainty. By acting consistently, you convert speculation into experience. Experience clarifies next steps. This loop keeps you grounded in reality rather than trapped in abstraction. There is a humility in consistent action. It accepts that progress is incremental. It resists the ego's desire for dramatic transformation. This humility keeps you focused on what you can control today rather than fantasizing about outcomes you cannot yet sustain. Over time, consistent action creates momentum. Momentum changes perception of difficulty. Tasks that once felt overwhelming become manageable. This momentum is fragile if consistency breaks, but powerful when maintained. It carries you through periods of low motivation. Consistent action also reinforces standards. When you act daily, standards are practiced, not debated. You become less tolerant of excuses because you have proof that action is possible. This raises expectations internally and externally. Ultimately, consistent action is the discipline that turns principles into results. Without it, habits remain ideas, goals remain wishes, and potential remains dormant. With it, progress becomes inevitable, not because any single action is extraordinary, but because ordinary actions performed repeatedly create extraordinary outcomes, shaping character, capability, and confidence through steady execution that continues regardless of mood, circumstance, or immediate reward. Self-accountability is the internal standard that governs behavior when no one is watching and no consequence is immediate. It is the discipline of holding yourself to commitments without relying on external enforcement, validation, or pressure. Where responsibility acknowledges ownership, accountability enforces execution. It is the difference between knowing what should be done and ensuring that it actually gets done. Most people associate accountability with external systems, managers, deadlines, metrics, or social pressure. These can be effective, but they are incomplete. External accountability fails the moment oversight disappears. Self-accountability remains. It is portable. It travels with you into private moments where real habits are formed and real outcomes are decided. Without it, progress becomes conditional. With it, progress becomes consistent. Self-accountability begins with honesty. Not performative honesty, but internal accuracy. It requires acknowledging when effort was insufficient, when excuses replaced action, and when standards were quietly lowered. This honesty is uncomfortable because it removes the buffer between intention and reality. But discomfort here is productive. It creates alignment. It closes the gap between who you claim to be and how you actually behave. There is a psychological strength in self-accountability that is often misunderstood. It is not self-criticism. It is self-respect. Criticism attacks identity. Accountability protects it. When you hold yourself accountable, you are signaling that your goals matter enough to be enforced. You are saying that your word has weight, even when it is only given to yourself. Self-accountability also creates reliability, not just in how others see you, but in how you see yourself. Every time you follow through on a commitment, you reinforce trust in your own judgment and discipline. Every time you break one without correction, that trust erodes. Over time, this internal trust becomes the foundation of confidence. You no longer question whether you will act. You expect it. Another key function of self-accountability is correction. Everyone fails. Everyone slips. Accountability is not about perfection. It is about response. When a standard is missed, accountability demands adjustment rather than justification. It asks what will change next time, not who or what will be blamed. This forward-facing orientation prevents stagnation and keeps momentum intact. Self-accountability also simplifies decision-making. When standards are clear, choices become obvious. You do not debate whether to act in alignment, you execute. Ambiguity disappears. This clarity reduces mental fatigue and emotional negotiation. Life becomes less about convincing yourself and more about directing yourself. There is a compounding effect to this habit. Small acts of accountability reinforce identity. Identity reinforces behavior. Behavior reinforces outcomes. Over time, this loop creates a person who does not need motivation to do what is required. They act because it is who they are. This identity-based discipline is far more durable than discipline based on mood or circumstance. Self-accountability also reshapes how failure is interpreted. Without accountability, failure becomes evidence of inadequacy. With accountability, failure becomes information. You assess what broke down and adjust the system. This reduces emotional volatility. You stop attaching self-worth to outcomes and start attaching it to effort and correction. There is also a protective element to self-accountability. It guards against self-deception. Humans are skilled at rationalizing behavior that conflicts with stated goals. Accountability interrupts that narrative. It forces alignment between language and action. When you say you value something, accountability checks whether your behavior agrees. This check prevents drift. Self-accountability strengthens autonomy. When you rely on others to hold you accountable, you remain dependent. When you hold yourself accountable, you reclaim control. This autonomy increases resilience because progress is no longer contingent on external structure. You become self-governing. In relationships and professional environments, self-accountability builds credibility. People trust those who do not need to be chased, reminded, or managed excessively. Reliability becomes your reputation. This opens opportunities because responsibility is entrusted to those who consistently deliver without excuses. Self-accountability also reinforces boundaries. You become less tolerant of behaviors that undermine your goals, including your own. Time is respected. Energy is protected. Commitments are chosen carefully because they will be enforced. This selectivity improves quality of execution. Importantly, self-accountability is a private discipline. There is no applause for keeping promises to yourself. This makes it a pure expression of character. It is done because it is right, not because it is seen. Habits formed in this space are the most authentic and enduring. Self-accountability also improves emotional regulation. When you know you will be held to your own standards, impulsive behavior loses appeal. Short-term comfort is weighed against long-term consequence. This internal check reduces self-sabotage and regret. Over time, self-accountability becomes a stabilizing force. During chaos, it provides structure. During success, it prevents complacency. It maintains consistency across changing circumstances. This stability is rare and valuable. Ultimately, self-accountability is the mechanism that transforms intention into identity. It ensures that goals are not merely stated, but enforced, that standards are not aspirational, but operational, and that progress is not accidental, but earned through repeated alignment between commitment and action, day after day, choice after choice, until discipline becomes instinct and follow through becomes automatic. Quiet reflection is the deliberate practice of stepping out of noise to examine thought, behavior, and direction with honesty and calm attention. It is not passive thinking or idle contemplation. It is active awareness. In a world that rewards speed, reaction, and constant stimulation, quiet reflection is countercultural and powerful. It creates the space where insight forms, patterns are recognized, and correction becomes possible before damage compounds. Most people move through life without reflection. They act, react, repeat, and rarely pause long enough to evaluate whether their actions align with their intentions. This lack of pause creates momentum without direction. Quiet reflection interrupts that momentum just long enough to regain control. It asks not what happened, but why it happened and what it means. Without this inquiry, behavior remains unconscious and improvement remains accidental. Quiet reflection strengthens self-awareness. You begin to notice emotional patterns, recurring mistakes, and habitual responses that once operated unnoticed. Awareness removes surprise. When you understand your tendencies, you are less controlled by them. Reflection turns experience into data rather than drama. Instead of reliving moments emotionally, you analyze them constructively. This habit is essential for learning. Experience alone does not teach. Experience plus reflection teaches. Without reflection, lessons are missed and repeated. With reflection, even failure becomes valuable. You extract principles, not just memories. Over time, this accelerates growth because you are not starting from zero after each setback. You are building on accumulated understanding. Quiet reflection also clarifies values. In constant motion, values are overshadowed by urgency. What matters gets replaced by what demands attention. Reflection restores perspective. It allows you to reassess priorities and adjust course. This recalibration prevents drift. Drift is rarely dramatic. It is subtle, gradual, and unnoticed until distance is great. Reflection shortens that distance by catching misalignment early. Emotionally, quiet reflection reduces reactivity. When emotions are examined rather than acted upon immediately, they lose intensity. Naming an emotion accurately often dissolves its grip. Reflection creates distance between feeling and action. In that distance, choice emerges. Choice restores agency. Agency restores calm. Quiet reflection also improves decision quality. When you review decisions after they are made, you refine judgment for future ones. You see where assumptions were flawed, where information was missing, and where emotion interfered. This feedback loop sharpens intuition over time. Intuition becomes informed rather than impulsive. There is also a moral dimension to quiet reflection. It forces integrity. When alone with your thoughts, there is no audience to impress and no narrative to maintain. You confront inconsistencies between who you claim to be and how you behave. This confrontation is uncomfortable, but it is corrective. Growth requires honesty that cannot be outsourced. Quiet reflection deepens accountability. You cannot reflect meaningfully without acknowledging your role in outcomes. Blame dissolves in solitude. Excuses lose their audience. What remains is responsibility. This reinforces ownership and strengthens character. The practice also enhances creativity. Insight often emerges in stillness, not stimulation. When the mind is quiet, connections form naturally. Problems that seemed complex reveal simple solutions. This is not accidental. The brain requires space to integrate information. Reflection provides that space. Quiet reflection also slows time psychologically. Days feel longer not because there is more time, but because moments are fully processed rather than rushed through. This presence reduces the sensation of life slipping away. You remember more because you experienced more consciously. Many people avoid quiet reflection because it exposes discomfort. Silence amplifies unresolved thoughts. Reflection surfaces doubts, regrets, and fears. But avoidance does not remove these elements. It only buries them where they continue to influence behavior indirectly. Reflection brings them into awareness where they can be addressed. Quiet reflection does not require isolation for hours. It requires consistency and intention. Even brief periods of undistracted thinking can be transformative when practiced regularly. The value lies not in duration, but in depth and honesty. Over time, quiet reflection reshapes identity. You become someone who thinks before reacting, who evaluates before repeating, who learns before moving on. This identity creates stability. You are less swayed by trends, opinions, and external pressure because your internal compass is calibrated regularly. Reflection also strengthens gratitude. When you pause to consider progress, effort, and support, appreciation emerges naturally. Gratitude stabilizes emotion and improves resilience. It balances ambition with perspective. Quiet reflection integrates all other habits. It connects action to intention, emotion to control, time to values. Without reflection, habits operate independently. With reflection, they align into a coherent system. Ultimately, quiet reflection is where wisdom forms. Not information, but understanding. It is where experience is distilled into principle and principle into guidance. In silence, you hear what noise drowns out. In stillness, you see what motion conceals. When reflection becomes habitual, life becomes intentional rather than reactive, progress becomes guided rather than random, and growth becomes sustainable because you are no longer rushing forward blindly, but moving with awareness, clarity, and deliberate understanding of who you are, and where you are choosing to go. Relentless standards are the uncompromising expectations you hold for your own behavior, effort, and integrity regardless of circumstance, mood, or convenience. They are not about perfection. They are about refusal to normalize mediocrity. A person with relentless standards does not negotiate with excuses, does not dilute expectations when things become difficult, and does not lower the bar to match temporary discomfort. They understand that life rarely rises above the standards you enforce consistently. Most people have preferences, not standards. Preferences are flexible. Standards are enforced. Preferences say, I'd like to. Standards say, this is required. The difference between the two determines outcomes. When standards are weak, effort fluctuates. When standards are strong, behavior stabilizes. Relentless standards create predictability in action, and predictability compounds into progress. Relentless standards begin internally. They are not imposed by comparison or external pressure. They are chosen deliberately. This choice is critical because standards you borrow rarely survive resistance. Standards you choose become part of identity. Once something is tied to identity, violating it feels uncomfortable. This discomfort becomes self-regulating. You no longer rely on motivation or reminders. The standard enforces itself. There is a misconception that high standards create stress. In reality, unclear standards create stress. When expectations are vague, you constantly renegotiate with yourself. You debate effort. You justify shortcuts. You wonder if what you did was enough. Clear, relentless standards eliminate this friction. You know what is required. You either meet it or you don't. This clarity is calming. Relentless standards protect against drift. Drift is subtle. It happens when small compromises go unchecked. One missed commitment becomes acceptable. One excuse becomes reasonable. Over time, the exception becomes the rule. Standards stop this decay early. They do not allow small lapses to redefine behavior. This is not rigidity, it is maintenance of direction. High standards also elevate performance without increasing intensity. When expectations are clear, execution improves naturally. You do not need to push harder. You need to accept less deviation. Consistency replaces bursts of effort. Reliability replaces heroics. This approach is sustainable and scalable. Relentless standards also shape environment. You begin to notice what aligns with your expectations and what does not. You become less tolerant of distractions, inefficiencies, and behaviors that undermine your goals. This selectivity is not judgment of others. It is stewardship of self. You protect what you are building by limiting what interferes with it. There is a moral dimension to relentless standards. They represent self-respect. When you consistently accept less than you are capable of, you signal to yourself that your potential is optional. Standards correct that message. They say your effort matters. Your word matters. Your consistency matters. This internal respect strengthens character. Relentless standards also eliminate reliance on external validation. You no longer need praise to feel satisfied. You evaluate yourself against your own criteria. This autonomy stabilizes confidence. Confidence rooted in self. Assessment is quieter and more durable than confidence rooted in approval. Importantly, relentless standards are specific. Vague standards invite loopholes. Specific standards create accountability. You know exactly what is acceptable and what is not. This specificity simplifies decision-making. When faced with a choice, you do not ask how you feel. You ask whether the action meets the standard. Relentless standards also increase resilience. When challenges arise, standards remain constant. Circumstances change. Expectations do not. This consistency prevents emotional bargaining. You do not lower effort because the day is difficult. You adjust tactics, not standards. This distinction preserves momentum during adversity. Many people fear high standards because they associate them with harsh self-judgment. In reality, relentless standards reduce self-judgment by replacing emotion with criteria. You are not attacking yourself. You are measuring behavior. Measurement enables improvement. Judgment paralyzes it. Relentless standards also influence pace. When standards are low, progress is erratic. When standards are high, progress is steady. You may move slower initially because shortcuts are eliminated, but over time you surpass those who relied on bursts of intensity without structure. Standards favor longevity. There is also a compounding reputational effect. People notice consistency. They trust those who do not fluctuate. Opportunities are given to individuals who maintain standards under pressure because predictability reduces risk. This trust is earned quietly through repeated adherence to expectations. Relentless standards sharpen focus. When standards are clear, distractions lose appeal. You stop engaging in activities that do not contribute to your objectives because they violate your criteria for how time and energy are used. This filtering effect simplifies life. Standards also guard against complacency. Success often weakens effort more than failure. When standards are relentless, success does not excuse decline. You do not relax discipline because things are going well. You maintain it because standards are not dependent on circumstance. Over time, relentless standards reshape identity. You stop seeing discipline as effort and start seeing it as normal. What once felt demanding becomes baseline. This shift raises capacity. Without conscious strain, growth becomes structural rather than motivational. Relentless standards are not about being hard on yourself. They are about being honest with yourself. Honest about what is required. Honest about what you tolerate. Honest about the gap between intention and execution. That honesty fuels progress. Ultimately, relentless standards are the silent force behind exceptional lives. They do not announce themselves. They do not seek recognition. They operate daily, quietly enforcing alignment between values and behavior. When standards are low, potential negotiates itself into obscurity. When standards are relentless, potential is expressed through consistent action, disciplined choices, and unwavering commitment to doing what is required even when it is inconvenient, unnoticed, or uncomfortable, because the standard is not dependent on how you feel. It is dependent on who you have decided to be